Let me just add to what my good friend from Missouri talks about, and that's about the federal commitment to disaster. North Carolina happens to be one of those states that is probably the most recent. And we welcome the attention of FEMA, but we also have been the last disaster before. And just like he expects the promises to be fulfilled, even though we're first in line now, we expect the promises to be fulfilled to those who are already out there. Our country is great enough to do it. It is the greatest country in the world, but it means we've got to do it in a responsible way, and part of that means that we need to pay for it. And I hope my colleagues will join what I think will be a House effort to expedite the funding needed for disaster relief, but to do it in a way that we don't charge future generations because of our fiscal irresponsibility. Now, I had the opportunity to participate in a colloquy earlier on reforms to K through 12 education. And I'd just like to take the few remaining minutes that I've got to talk a little bit more about that. Because I think to some degree we hear about education and the failures of K through 12. Senator Kirk alluded to some charter schools in Chicago. I want to mention a school nobody hears about. It's called the KIPP Academy. Technically, it's a charter school. It was started in Houston, Texas, and then expanded. Its second location was in New York City. Well, its third location was targeted to be Atlanta, but halfway between Atlanta and New York, they found a little rural county in North Carolina. It's called Northampton County, and a little community there called Gaston, North Carolina. The last place you would expect a Texas innovated charter school to say, let's put a facility here. Predominantly minority, clearly below the average income level of every county in North Carolina, challenged for economic development. They just don't have the infrastructure. But KIPP looked at it and said, you know, no child should go without what we're out there to offer. And today, the success rate out of that school is off the chart. But it also is in every KIPP location that's opened up. And when you have successes like that, whether they're in Houston, Texas, or New York City, or Gaston, North Carolina, the responsible thing is to stop and take a breath and ask yourself, what have they figured out that either we haven't in Washington, or what flexibility do they have that we don't give everybody else? And when you walk into a KIPP school, it's markedly different as soon as you walk in the door. Most kids are in uniforms. The school day is longer. The teachers are partners in education, which begs me to talk a little bit about Teach for America, a program that many members of Congress support. Teach for America challenged the next generation of kids who want to be educators to commit a certain portion of their life in these at-risk locations. It's a program we ought to support because its standards for its teachers exceed the definition we have for highly qualified. As a matter of fact, not only do their credentials make them one of the best individuals to put in a classroom, you match that with their passion for their students to succeed, and all of a sudden you've got a formula for success regardless of the socioeconomic conditions of the child that came. Well, I fear that Teach for America is not going to get the attention of Congress that it should. Yet across this country, when you find successful, qualified teachers, they've come out of this program. And the commitment to be there for 2 years or 3 years or 5 years is no longer a contract that they're waiting for the end of. They're looking for the opportunity to make this a career. And you know, it's those teachers, those Teach for America graduates that are finding their way to being the principals of schools, to being elected on the school board, to being involved in areas that for once, now these Teach for America graduates are challenging traditional education to live up to what the obligation is they've got, and that's to make sure that every child has the foundational education they need to compete. And it really doesn't matter whether the example I talk about is the KIPP Academy charter model that was started in Houston, or whether it's the Noble Street charter that was created in Chicago. all of these examples weren't created here. They weren't created in Congress or in Washington. Yet, what typically we do is we try to import the solution from here. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, a principal is much closer to your children than Congress of the United States. They're much closer to the school. They're much closer to the school system. They have greater influence on the outcome. Where have we been influencing education? We influence it on the input side, not the output side. Because we say, hey, here's some money. We've got some money, but you can only use it for this because we've determined this is the solution to the problem. KIPP sort of broke the mold. They said, our mission is to educate every child. We want to see them succeed. Let me give my colleagues an example. In Charlotte, North Carolina, they opened a KIPP Academy, K through 8, next door to a traditional K through 6 school. There's no way anybody can look at it and say, this drew kids that were in a different neighborhood. No, it drew kids from exactly the same neighborhood. But if you look at the performance side by side physically, the performance of the kids in the KIPP far excel the performance of the kid in the traditional public school system. Why? Because KIPP officials have the flexibility to design how they educate those children. The goal at the end is the same, to meet a standard of performance, to meet an educational level that's set nationally. Well, to me, it only makes common sense for us to see the ones that exceed what the goals are that we set and ask, how do we import what they do into the rest of our K through 12 system? Part of it is recognizing the fact that up here we don't have the solutions. We're merely a financial partner. And that's one of the reasons, Mr. President, that this morning I introduced a bill. And what that bill does is it takes 59 pots of money, 59 separate programs that were funded last year. And in one area, we call it the Fund for Improvement of Teaching and Learning. You see, we take 59 programs and we combine them into 2 pots of money. One of them, teaching and learning. The second one, safe, healthy students. In the teaching and learning area, we've consolidated about 24 funding programs into one. And we've said to local educators, you can use this money however you want to if your focus is teaching and learning. And you can pull out of the other pot any monies you need for programs that address safe and healthy students. Now, we went a step further. We said, if one of these pots of monies doesn't work for you, then we'll give you 100% transferability from one pot to the other. So if your objective and your need is greater in teaching and learning, we'll give you the ability to take all the safe and healthy student money and throw it over in the teacher and learning pot so that you can access more funds. In addition to that, there may be some communities across the country that need additional help in Title I, those at-risk students. We allow 100% transferability of both funds to Title I. So for those individuals across the country that are concerned with Title I, not only do we not touch it, we leave it like it exists, we make it available to receive additional funding if a school system decides to do it, not a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. So under the Fund of Improving Teaching and Learning, states and local school districts may use the funds for activities and programs that meet the purposes of the fund for the improvement of teaching and learning and their unique and individual needs. These may include evaluation systems for teachers and principals that take into account data on student academic achievement and growth of a significant factor. Exactly what Senator Isaacson was talking about, the need for accountability. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to take a majority of the responsibility for accountability and send it to the local school system. All we can see is numbers up here in comparison to what our goal was for people to hit. What I'm concerned with is that a community take ownership in the performance of their school systems, because that community is reliant on their success for their future. Mr. Chairman, I see that my colleague he's going to switch with you, so I'll continue. So my hope is that school systems and communities around the country will see this as a tremendous opportunity to once again not only take control of local education, but to be empowered to make decisions on the way that they teach our kids. It reforms teacher and principal certifications, recertifications, licensing and tenure, alternative routes for state certification of teachers and principals, including mid-career professionals from other occupations, former military personnel, and recent college or university graduates with records of academic distinction who demonstrate the potential to become highly effective teachers and principals. You see, there's this whole pool of people that we exclude because they didn't go through a traditional method of being classified teacher. Yet their base of knowledge, their expertise, and I would suggest their passion in many cases exceed those that might be in that classroom today. Is it reasonable to believe that a pharmacist has the institutional knowledge to teach chemistry? I hope so, because we trust them every day when we go into that pharmacy. If a pharmacist feels impassioned enough that he or she wants to go in to a high school and teach chemistry, what they might lack in the educational process of becoming a teacher, certainly they have the knowledge, but more importantly, they have the passion to want to be in there. And more importantly, an understanding of why success of that student is absolutely vital. Performance pay systems, differential incentives and bonus pay for teachers in high-need academic subjects, specialty areas, teachers in high-poverty schools and districts, teacher achievement initiatives that promote professional growth, multiple career paths, and pay differentiation. You know, everywhere else in the world, we pay bonuses for performance. As a matter of fact, in the government, we pay bonuses when people don't perform. I haven't quite ever figured that out, but when we introduce bonuses, it's not based upon whether somebody or an agency or a department succeeded. It just becomes part of their annual stipend. We've got to revisit that. But why would we institute it in government and then suggest that when you import this into K through 12 education that somehow it's wrong? The only reason it's wrong is because the teachers union doesn't like it because they don't negotiate it. Well, that's got to change. Because the teachers union doesn't know our children. And the truth is, the only reason the majority of the teachers actually join the union is because they're the only source of liability coverage, of liability insurance that teacher can get. And the fact is, you and I wouldn't teach in a classroom without liability insurance based upon the accusations and charges that some families come up with against teachers. If you don't believe me, ask them. Maybe what we need to do is look at a federal umbrella where we allow teachers to access liability insurance from us, maybe contract it with a third-party insurer, and give them the opportunity to go into that classroom and only be concerned with educating children. You know, I've never had anybody from Teach for America talk to me about liability coverage. They only come in and talk to me about the success of their students, about the need to expand programs at work, about the need for flexibility at the local level, because they've gone to multiple school districts and they do things differently because that's where the administration told them they had to go to get their federal money. I'm suggesting a radical change, taking 59 programs, put it into two pots, shake it up and say, you pick what's best for the school system you're in. And Safe and Healthy Students block grants, the local districts could use the fund for activities and programs that meet the purposes of safe and healthy students and their unique and individual needs, which may include but are not limited to drug and violence prevention activities and programs, before and after school programs, including summer recess periods and programs that extend the school day, week, and the school calendar year, school-based mental health services. You know, some of these sound eerily familiar because we've heard in our community people say, you know, we're not doing enough in mental health. Well, that may not be the issue in the community next to us. This now allows the flexibility for the school systems that need to access it. I think every member up here wants to make sure that there are after-school opportunities for the many families that both husband and wife work. Up till this point, we said, here's the program, you have to use this program. Now what I'm saying is, here's the money, you decide what program best fits your school system. It may not be at the local rec center. It may actually be in the school. Think about it. It's already a facility that we own. We're going to have to heat it. We're going to have to cool it. Why not utilize it other than just during the meat of the education day? School-based, emergency intervention services following traumatic crisis. You know, it seems like every year we've got these events that happen, and sometimes we forget the effect it has on these students. I just talked earlier about Eastern North Carolina and the effects of Hurricane Irene. I've got communities right now where people have not been able to return to their home. The road's gone, power's not back on, the only access is by ferry. Don't for a minute believe this doesn't have an effect on a fifth grader. Maybe school had only been in effect for about a week, but they're traumatized from it. If it's identified by a school system, now they've got the flexibility to treat that. Because I can assure you, if they're traumatized, the ability to learn is probably minimized. Programs that train school personnel to identify warning signs of youth suicide. Now, I'd like to suggest, Mr. President, that doesn't exist. And the truth is we know that it does. And in many cases, it's identified by the people that spend the most time with them, and that's their teachers, coaches, and administrators. But they really don't have the capacity to intervene in any way, shape, or form. Now the flexibility is at least there. I'm not suggesting that any of these areas are things that school systems have to do. But I think for once we have now laid a buffet out and said, you pick and choose what works. If I could best summarize where I think our focus should be in Washington on K through 12 is on the outcome. Are our kids learning? Last year, about 66% of our nation's high schoolers graduated on time. North Carolina, it was barely over 70% graduated on time. Now, let me assure those pages that are here and young folks that might be listening to this. There's a federal law that says every company has to accept an application from somebody that's looking for a job. There is no federal law that says you have to interview that applicant. And if you're an employer today and you've got 100 applications and 98 of them have a high school diploma and 2 of them don't, I can assure you the 2 that don't have the high school diploma are not going to be invited back for an interview. They're out of the pool of selection because that has become the base minimum for consideration of a job that might have any upward mobility. Doesn't mean that every child has to have a 4-year degree. But it does mean from a standpoint of the business world, business has sort of cut it off and said, our threshold is a high school diploma. A high 60% of our kids are not graduating from high school on time. If I was on the floor today talking about health care, we would call this an epidemic, and we would do whatever we needed to do to fix it. But no, this is education. This is somebody else's children. I have already raised mine. I've educated mine. I would tell you this is the fabric, the future fabric of America. We either fix education or the rest of the world will clean our clock economically in the future. The secret to long-term success is making sure that we field a team of highly gifted, knowledgeable Americans. If we plan to do that with a high 60% of our kids with barely a high school diploma, I will assure you the rest of the world will see that as an opportunity to surpass us and to bury us. We've got an opportunity to fix it now. We talked earlier about No Child Left Behind. The right direction of legislation that was severely implemented incorrectly. It could have been a real winner if people embraced it, but they didn't. And now 9 years later, 4 years after we were supposed to go in and assess its success, make its changes, reauthorize it, we're in the 9th year and we're still struggling to try to put together a reauthorization bill. And in large measure because up till this point, everybody's wanted to try to create a Washington bill to initiate solutions to elementary and secondary education versus a local approach that Washington is a partner in that provides flexibility and imagination. Mr. President, we're going to spend a lot of time between now and the end of the year because I think it's absolutely vital that we get reauthorization in 2011. I don't think we can let another class of students suffer through the lack of flexibility in the school systems that they live in. Senator Kirk talked about the need to expand charter school opportunities. I'm for it. I co-sponsor the bill. But just because there's been a private alternative that works, let's also face the reality. We're not going to put every child in America in a charter school. We might ought to, but we're not. And unless we want to up front say everybody that's not in a charter school is going to suffer and they're not going to have the educational foundation that kids over here have, then we better do both at the same time. Provide that new avenue of education, which is expansion of charter school opportunities, challenge the private sector like KIPP stepped up, and design a school that works. And at the same time, look at the public side of it and say, what do we need to do as a country? And I would suggest to you that when we honestly look at that and we focus on outcome versus input, what we'll find is that we've got to empower more that local community. We've got to challenge business leaders in that community to hold the school system accountable. We've got to challenge parents to actually look at the performance of their children and to hold those principals and administrators and teachers accountable for the performance of their kids. We've got to make sure that a community sees the success of education as the ability for that community to grow in the future. The worst thing that a member of Congress can hear is to go into a community where they tell you when their kids graduate from high school, they never return. They never return because the business opportunities aren't there. Usually that's rooted in the fact that K through 12 in that community doesn't work. Because wherever you've got an educated workforce, you've got a company looking to make investments. I've heard my colleagues say that North Carolina has unfair advantages at economic development, that we've got 58 community colleges, and that gives us something to sell that everybody else doesn't have. We've got the coast and the beach, the mountains and the beach, and that's not something everybody has. It's all a good thing to sell, but let me tell you what North Carolina's got. Let me tell you why companies around the world are investing in North Carolina. It's because we produce the second largest pool of graduates of higher education annually of any state in the country other than California. When a company invests $1 billion in North Carolina, they know every year they can reach into the graduate pool and that they have a shot at getting the cream of the crop of those students. Well, why would it be any different that when a company looks at locating, if they look at a community that has a pitiful performance in K through 12, why would they ever think of making the investment there? They're going to make the investment where the future workforce is available, and if they believe that the kids graduate and leave and never come back, then they're going to look for where those kids move to make that investment. If we want to keep communities alive, whether they're in Ohio or North Carolina, we've got to find a way to make K through 12 a success in every community, big and small, urban and rural. And it starts by legislation that empowers those local school systems. And more importantly, shifts accountability from Washington and puts it back into the community, the responsibility of the officials, the business leaders, and most importantly, the parents. I'd like to thank the President for accommodating me this morning. I noticed the other speaker didn't come in, so I'm thrilled that I was given the extra time. I would urge my colleagues over the months to come to pay attention to the K through 12 reauthorization. There'll be many proposals that are out there. Not all will work, and we're not assured that any are certain to succeed. But if you look for guidance, talk to the people that are closest to the problem. And the one thing that they're screaming for today is the flexibility to put the money where it can have the greatest effect on the outcome of education. And that's this legislation. I thank the President. I yield the floor, suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.